If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
If you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
but if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Dedeker.
and this is the Multiamory podcast.
Forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we are talking about emotional responsibility, otherwise known as owning your shit. That's right. We're going to be talking about what it means to be responsible for your emotions, both, finding that balance, not being too responsible for them, but also taking ownership of them. It's a very important topic, and one that's very close to all of us because it's something that all of us have struggled with in the past on either side of it, and currently struggle with all the time, right? Like, this is an ongoing thing, learning to understand your emotions and manage them in the best way possible.
Yeah, honestly, there have been times in my life where I just think that, like, human relationships are just too emotional, and I kind of long for dating a Vulcan.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
There's some days when I feel like that. Like, can I just have a relationship of pure logic? I'm sick of all of these wibbly-wobbly feelings. I'm tired of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's challenging if one of you is super emotional and then the other one is not.
Yeah.
That can provide problems as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that come on, let's be real, Dedeker. Like, Vulcans, at least Spock, does have emotions, right?
Spock is
Yes.
half human, though.
He is half human. I know. That's why
that's
I made
right.
the caveat. That's why I was like, well,
Well,
right. But I would also argue that based on some of the Star Trek lore, it does seem that all of them actually do have emotions.
They have
They're
some.
Just
It's
really
just
good
about
at
the way that they
repressing them.
process it. Yes, that's the thing. And honestly, actually, I really didn't get on the Vulcan train until I had a sex dream about Zachary Quinto, Dr. Spock.
Oh, well, who hasn't, though?
Oh, God. And
Right.
ever since then, it's just, yeah.
No, I feel like all of my sex dreams about him, though, were when he was on Heroes as Siler.
yeah.
But he
as,
was the
like-
bad guy on Heroes.
No, I know, but he was so
Better than when
dreamy.
he was in American
He was
Horror
so
Story.
bad. Oh my god,
yeah.
he was really bad in that.
He was great, but bad. Yeah.
Well, let's not talk about emotional responsibility. Let's just talk about sexy Zachary Quinto.
Oh god.
Yes, exactly. Okay, but seriously though,
But seriously, though, Zachary Quinto, that face. I'm sorry.
But
He is-
seriously,
yes.
though, emotional responsibility. What the heck is emotional responsibility?
That's
know
an
what?
excellent question.
yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked.
Yeah, so I think it's understanding that your emotions come from you and not from other people. I've definitely been in a situation, or I've been in other situations, like with myself and with my partners, where somebody says, "Hey, like, you made me feel X,"
Yeah,
and that's not necessarily taking emotional responsibility for what you're feeling.
right. The idea that someone else or something else makes you feel something,
Exactly.
Yeah.
right?
And of course, always your emotions are going to be influenced by external factors. You know, we're not saying that, you know, anything you feel, you're just totally making it up.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
But yeah, the fact that there is the influence, but ultimately your emotional response comes from you. You know, no one can generally actually hold a gun to your head and make you feel something.
That's true.
Right. That they would be holding the gun to your head, which would be triggering fear in you. But they're not actually making you feel the fear. It's like this weird subtle difference, but it's important. And I would say the second part of emotional responsibility is taking ownership for your emotional responses and the way that you react to your emotions.
Yeah.
For example, I'm not always going to be able to control when I feel an emotion. So, maybe you make me really angry. I just said you make me feel angry. You guys were supposed to yell at me for that.
No.
Right. Say you did
Bad.
something, and then I felt angry because of, related to something that happened. That triggered anger in me. Either way, I still have I still have control over how I react to that.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. I can make the choice to punch you in the face, or yell at you,
Don't do
or
that.
cry about it, or, take a moment to, breathe and think about it, right? There's a lot of different options, but whatever I choose, I'm responsible for that.
Yeah.
Right? That I have ownership for my own emotional reactions.
Yeah.
Dedeker, did you want to do the third part of this?
Yeah, I think the third part of emotional responsibility is also kind of having an awareness to recognize the temporary nature of emotions. And this one can be really hard, because especially when you're in the middle of a negative emotion, it's so easy to feel like, oh God, this is my life forever from now on,
Right.
And so, sometimes, obviously, this can happen on a clinical level, like with chronic depression, where you can get at the bottom of that depression well and it feels like nothing's going to come out of it. But to not take it to that clinical level, just talking about, kind of everyday emotional response that, maybe someone triggers you and you get really angry, or something disappointing happens at work and you get really frustrated, that, part of emotional responsibility is recognizing, things suck right now in this moment, but, it's going to pass. Or things suck right now, but I know that this is not who I am, or I know that this is not what my life is, or I know that this is not what existence is.
Yeah.
So I think that's another important factor of it.
Can you hit us with that info about the lifespan of emotions that I can't remember where you learned about this on a retreat or in some sort of Buddhist thing or what?
This is a little bit controversial because I couldn't really find the actual science to back this up. But what's kind of tossed around is that when you experience some kind of emotion, whether it's happiness or sadness or frustration or jealousy or whatever, those are usually attached to some kind of physical sensations in the body. Maybe when you're angry, your face starts to feel flushed, or maybe when you're feeling scared, your stomach kind of starts to twist. Usually that's how we even know we're having an emotion at all, is because there's some kind of physical response in the body. If you do not actually feed that physical response, as in if, you suddenly get a thought of fear, if you don't sit there and kind of obsessively think about the thing that you're afraid of, or start to think about all the ways things could be worse, or start to panic, that physical sensation in your body does not last very long, actually. And people quote a variety of duration. Some people say, it only lasts about 60 seconds or 90 seconds. Some people say it lasts as short as 7 seconds. If you let that physical sensation just arise and pass that without feeding it, that it's actually quite short. Which, again, I couldn't find any kind of actual information to back that up. I can speak from anecdotal experience that I found that to be actually quite true.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky one, too, because this is something I notice a lot in the workplace, is that complaining about something that you're feeling, we have this social glue of I complain about something and then you complain about it too, or you agree with me about complaining about it, and that's how we sort of bond with each other. But really what we're doing is we're feeding that cycle. We're still feeding that feeling. So it doesn't actually make you feel any better, even though it might feel like it is at the moment. But, I know that there was a big campaign a few years ago, it was on Oprah, whatever, about stopping complaining. Right?
Yeah,
that you can be upset about stuff.
Jase, right?
It's something that I always kind of try to keep in mind, and sometimes I'm better than others about it. But it definitely makes a difference, though. When you're feeding that by complaining, you do tend to feel those feelings more often.
Yeah.
So I feel like when we talk about emotional responsibility, kind of the easiest access point is to talk about what's probably going to be a familiar experience to many people, which is the experience of not taking emotional responsibility. Either yourself not taking responsibility, or being with a partner or a person, who doesn't take responsibility.
Right.
And we've all been guilty of this at some point,
Sure.
And we've all also been on the receiving end of this. But it's things like, when conflict breaks out between you and a partner, and you say to your partner, well, you did this thing and you made me angry.
Right.
Or you left and went out on a date and you made me feel lonely. Or you were texting with someone else and you made me feel jealous.
Right.
And so it's this interesting thing, because it's not like we're telling you that you can't say that you felt jealous, or you can't say that you felt angry, you can't say that you felt sad, but it's pinning it on your partner. Even though it may seem so totally logical, in our brain, it seems so totally logical. Like, they did this thing, I got angry, so
cause
they
and effect,
did this
right?
to me. Yeah, cause and effect.
Yeah.
But again, as we established at the beginning, your emotions come solely from you, and it's pretty much never just the result of an external factor. It's also the result of all kinds of causes and conditions and triggers and neuroses and assumptions within you.
And also going with that is the idea that if a partner does something that triggers that feeling in you, that somehow you're stuck there forever now. That they've like permanently changed, or like at least long-term changed your mental state, right? And that's not necessarily true. But I definitely know I've gone to that place before, and I've had partners that have, where it's just like, you made me feel this way, and now I can't ever feel another way, right?
Yeah.
I've just been destroyed by this thing.
I think this is also related to sometimes we can kind of get trapped in this phenomenon of feeling like, well, something happened and I feel hurt, therefore you hurt me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this has come up a lot with people that I've coached, actually, because especially with couples, who are kind of feeling out the initial bumps of opening up a relationship, of kind of reassuring people that you might be doing everything completely correctly, and your partner may still feel hurt, but that doesn't mean that you did something wrong. Or telling someone, like, everything may be going totally smooth, but you may suddenly still feel jealous, and that doesn't mean that your partner did something wrong, and it doesn't mean that, like, you've done something wrong.
Right.
There is, especially
Right.
with the jealousy thing, that's a really important differentiation, I think, to be aware of, because so often we will feel things, if we're new to polyamory, or even if we're not, that just come up. And instead of blaming it on someone else, to kind of take responsibility for that is incredibly important. Like, I still feel that from time to time, and maybe more often than I'd like to admit, of just having a twinge of something like, shit, that kind of sucks, or that kind of hurts, but me being able to differentiate, like, my partner is not doing this to me. It is something that I need to work on, and I need to get better at. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one. The jealousy thing. Just I know that there are a few people out there who write blogs about polyamory or whatever who talk about never feeling jealous, and that's something that I'm like, cool, like, good for you, I guess, but like that's not me. Like, I'm not someone who's like, I have no jealousy, so poly's easy in that way or whatever, right? Like, poly's something that I believe in and makes a lot of sense to me, but it's not something that's easy all the time. But neither was monogamy, right? Like, I don't think life is set up to be easy all the time. If it was, I feel like we'd all be bored. Like, that might sound nice, but I feel like we'd all just be like, whatever, life. Who cares?
For sure.
Can we talk about the other side of this, though? So we've talked about blaming your partner for making you feel sad or for making you feel lonely or whatever. But I think there's also something really tricky if you put also the other side of your responsibility for being happy onto your partner. And I feel like, or either like saying that they're the reason why you're happy, or expecting that that's what a partner would do. And it's a tough one because that idea is super prevalent in our books and in our movies and plays and all of that, right?
And also, like also on the surface level does not seem like a bad concept. Also, is the other part of it,
right? Because we have these concepts like soulmates and stuff like that, right? That it's like, oh well, when you find the one, then it's all easy. And most people who've been married for a long time will back up the idea that it's not easy. It's always, it's always work. It's always growing and changing.
Absolutely.
But that idea, like the you complete me, that whole idea, I think is actually a very toxic idea to your own happiness. Because it's going to make you probably end or throw away a lot of relationships that could actually have been really good ones. Because they didn't solve all of your emotional problems. And so it's like, well, that can't be the one. I'm just going to get rid of that. Or like, oh, I sometimes felt unhappy in that relationship. That can't be it. And then also just, even if you do find someone who does kind of give you that happiness, that's not necessarily a sustainable thing or a healthy thing to put on them. Right? And I definitely have been on both sides of this. I've been on the side of like, if someone's not there, I'm not happy, and it's because I need them there to make me happy. And then I've also been on the other side too, where it's like, gosh, I feel this burden of like, I'm responsible for all of your happiness. Like, fuck, like, what if I'm just not feeling it that day, or I'm having a bad day? Like, what can I do? Because I'm responsible for this other person's whole like sense of well-being, right?
Yeah, that's a lot to put on another person.
For sure.
And I mean, even, it's a lot if you're in a monogamous relationship and kind of behaving in this way. That's a lot of pressure to put on another person. But even if you have multiple partners,
it's still a lot.
It's still a lot. It's still not necessarily a healthy thing to do. But, I mean, before we kind of get into, figuring out what are the actual practical ways to incorporate emotional responsibility, I do want to talk about, I'm of the opinion that there is actually something as taking too much emotional responsibility. I learned this the hard way in a past relationship of mine, in my relationship with Brad, when, like, relatively early on in the relationship, if something happened, or if he said something, or if he did something, and I felt upset about it, or I felt insecure about it, or I felt jealous, or I felt, something negative, that, I think in that phase, I was trying so hard to be a good poly person, and I'd just be like, okay, like, gotta take all my own shit. Okay, just take responsibility, and just, like, do what you gotta do. Just, like, go sit and meditate, go read a bunch of self-help books, and just get yourself to get over it, and then everything will be fine. And that worked to a certain point, until eventually it all kind of actually had to come out. Like, 'cause there were actually numerous things that I should have said something about, or that I should have brought up, or, boundaries that I should have maintained, but that I didn't, kind of in this interest of emotional responsibility. So I know it's a tricky thing, but I think that there is a balance to be struck between, not blaming your partner for something, but also knowing when it is appropriate to actually bring something to your partner.
I mean, there are things like gaslighting that obviously Brad was kind of, he did to you at times.
That's a whole other story.
But that's the thing. I mean, you have to make sure that you are taking responsibility, but also making sure that you're not being hurt by your partner. I think there are two separate things.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is that fine line trying to figure out which is which.
And I kind of feel like it's not something that you can just have an answer and always know what it is, but it's more that it's important to always be asking that question, right? Of where am I on this balance? Because on the one hand, it could be tempting to say, if you see something that's a pattern that's recurring, then it's like, oh, that's something that's a problem then. But it's like, but maybe that's a pattern in yourself that you still need to do work on, right? So there's always these two sides to things, but it is being willing to ask that question and finding that balance between advocating for what it is that you actually need. And like you said, I think you said it well, Dedeker, like what your boundaries are.
Yeah. And having the self-assuredness to know what those are.
Right.
Yeah.
To be like, here I am, this is what I need and what I don't need, and this is what I'm capable of. Like, a lot of people, I think the three of us are relatively good at being able to say, like, hey, I know that this is my shit and that I need to own it and that I need to work on that. And if you're able to do that, then you can know, like, hey, this is a reoccurring pattern within myself, or this is something that maybe is not being fair that my partner's asking of me.
Right. Sure. I think we're good about it most of the time.
Some
But
of the time.
You're
I'll
right.
speak for myself,
Maybe
not all the time.
I should pat myself on the back or ourselves on the back as much as
Right?
I currently am.
I think there's also, also going with that is I think some of that can come from this belief that if this particular relationship doesn't work out, whether it's a monogamous one or a poly one, if this doesn't work out, there aren't going to be any others. This is my only shot. I have to make this work somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that can also lead not only to what Dedeker was talking about, but also the idea of just being like, you might be upset about something and being like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And bottling things up, refusing to feel things, which is something I did for most of my life. Emily met me like right around the time that I learned to feel things, actually, which was a tumultuous time, like first learning that. But for so long, I would bottle things up. But then they do reach this point where you just feel like I don't understand why I'm acting this way or why I'm feeling this way, because it just kind of bubbles over. Right? Or if you insist on being always totally rational about your feelings, like that's not how feelings work. If that's how they worked, they would be called thinkings, right? Feelings, they do just yeah, but they do just happen. They happen inside of you. They can be triggered by other things, and they do come from yourself. They're not caused specifically by other things or given to you, but they are irrational. They're also not something that you can have Vulcan levels of control over. And if you do try to do that, it can actually really backfire and end up hurting you and the people in your life a lot.
Yeah. So I guess what we really want to drive home here is that taking emotional responsibility doesn't mean that you don't feel your emotions, or you feel your emotions but you don't let yourself do anything about it, or you don't let yourself say anything or anything like that. Like, actually, it's quite the opposite.
Right. Yeah, it's that by not letting your emotions rule you, but still listening to them and understanding them, can help you do a better job of advocating for yourself in a reasonable way and in a way that's respectful with your partners, but at the same time understanding that if even then you're not in a healthy emotional situation, that it is something you could get out of. And I know it's a tricky balance, and like I said, it's something that you kind of constantly need to be questioning. Where am I on this balance? And like recalibrating, rebalancing for that.
So the reason why I think that we as human beings struggle with emotional responsibility is because when you're in the middle of conflict or you're in the middle of a fight and it feels very, me versus you, it can be really hard to take emotional responsibility, because then it feels like, well, that means I'm taking the blame. And that means that I'm saying that this other person just gets off scot-free.
Right, that I'm losing.
And that it's, that I'm losing, exactly. And so that's why it can be difficult for us to actually kind of take a pause and actually kind of take responsibility for our own emotional reactions. However, an interesting and I think much healthier way to think about it is the fact that when you take emotional responsibility, it's not that you're like giving up or that you're losing or that you're conceding or anything like that. It means that now that you've taken responsibility for your emotions, now you have the power to actually do something about the situation.
Right.
So for instance, if I'm in the middle of an argument with Jase and we're bickering, and then I realize, oh wait, like the reason why I got angry about this is because actually like it reminded me of something that happened in like my last relationship, and so I thought that it meant that like you didn't care about me or whatever. So like that's entirely on me. But that means that now I have a choice. Like now I can choose to use kind words. I can choose to be honest about what's going on. I can choose to then ask for what it is that I need. Like then I have a lot of choices in that situation rather than just being crushed under the weight of this negative emotional response.
Yeah.
And to bring this to, a practical thing is that part of that choice could just be to stop. Could just be to halt. Which we like to say, right? If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired,
So Josh and I added D to it, so it's
halted.
Halt.
Oh, halt. Okay.
To halt.
What's the D?
Drinking. or drunk.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Good one, actually.
I feel like, Jase, didn't you also add horny to that?
We did add that at one point. Yeah.
Dehalted.
Yeah.
So dehalted.
It gets
Dehalted, huh?
But the point of it, right, is that one of your options is to just say, like, hey, you know what? I'm realizing, like, I'm sorry that I'm escalating this, that I'm causing this to be more of a fight than it needs to be. Like, I'm sorry for my part in that. I just need to stop. Like, can we come back to this later, right? And set a time to come back to it. It's not just like, let's not talk about this now, right? It's not that just like, oh, we can't talk about this. But it's like, let's make another time when we can have some time to maybe do some writing, which is something I really like to do if I'm feeling super emotional, is to write stuff down. And not to like make a list of all my like argument points for this debate class that we're gonna have.
You bitch.
But just for me to just kind of write stuff, get stuff out there onto paper, and when I do that, I can kind of see like, oh yeah, these are the things that matter. Or as I write something, being like, yeah, I don't know, that's not really it. It kind of helps me get some clarity. For me, that's a big handwriting specifically, not typing something. But just doing something like to pause. Right? Even if you don't have that insight right then of like, oh, this is because of this memory of, my mother abandoning me at the supermarket. Or, right, you might not have that epiphany in the moment. Did I just touch on your thing?
I was raised in the supermarket from that moment
I lived
forward.
in the supermarket.
There's wolves in the supermarket, mate.
Right, you might not have that epiphany right then. But if you do have that awareness of, oh, shit, I'm escalating this, I'm reacting emotionally, I'm letting those control me, rather than kind of understanding the emotions and then making choices, like maybe we just stop for a moment. Even if it's just for a few minutes. Yes?
And so when you do have that ability to kind of pause or to stop really quickly, it does give you a chance to then take the time to try to figure out kind of what your triggers are, or like what triggered you in that particular scenario. I think I remember in The Ethical Slut, I think that it was either Janet or Dossie talked about how it took her years to realize that she had a weird trigger around like anything moving fast near her face. And I think it was because of like it was either like some situation where like one of her parents like hit her when she was a child, or it was like an accident that she was in or something like that, where it was like if she was having any kind of conflict with a partner and if anything fast moved towards her face, that like she would just like dissolve into like rage and like the whole thing would go out the window. And so that's something that's like pinched. Completely not related to even what was going on. And your triggers may be things that are less mysterious than that. It could be just things like, wow, you said this exact phrase to me that like my ex used to say to me all the time.
Right. And they won't know that, right? Like,
and they won't know that
they don't
exactly.
Have that context.
Yeah. And so you can find out your triggers. If you want to really get deep into it, you can do some kind of counseling, some kind of therapy to really unpack any kind of past trauma or past habits, things like that. Any kind of personal development work, even just that, even doing the halt thing of just knowing like, oh, I know that when I get hungry, I'm really a bitch. Right. Or even just knowing like, sorry guys, I'm super sleepy. That's why I'm really cranky with you right now. Just kind of getting just getting a sense of what it is that triggers you is a good first step into knowing how to take responsibility for having those triggers.
Yeah. The next technique that I wanted to talk about is something that has really been big for me. And I'm actually kind of stealing Dedeker's thunder a little bit here because this is a meditation-related technique. But this is about understanding physically what your emotional responses are as they're happening. And this is something
like where they're felt in the body?
Right. Like Dedeker was talking earlier about, when you feel an emotion, usually it's in your body somewhere. And whether you choose to feed that or not, it could just go away. But in, again, relating to Brad, there was a time, quite a while when, like, I was dealing with a lot of, upsetness and sort of anger at what I perceived as injustice, not only toward myself, but also for both of you guys. And that was something that was, like, very triggering for me in a very angry way, right? Of like, I need to like fix this. I need to punish the perpetrator of this, right? Or I've got to, right? Like something has to happen. Whether the perpetrator at that time was Dedeker for having done something, or if it was Brad for having said something about me, or having done something to Emily, or right, like all of this, like all those different combinations. And what this was is specifically a meditation where you think of something that triggers that emotion in you, or even just do this when you're having that feeling, but is to imagine that you are moving outside of yourself and you're perceiving yourself from right outside, and you can like see what's happening in your body. You can see what's tightening, what's clenching, like where those feelings are. You know, if you're someone who, you know, sees them as colors or as shapes or as textures or whatever. But the point of it is to almost like take this step out, and you're still feeling this anger or this sadness or this loneliness or whatever, but you're kind of watching it and being able to go, well, that's fascinating. Like this is me being like, that's fascinating. Like you're
fascinating. Let's try that.
Right? Like there's all this energy up in your shoulders, and like this tightness in your throat about that. Like that's really interesting that that's how you're reacting to this. But that it kind of takes you from being in this place of like your emotions are this storm around you that you can't escape, to being like, oh, I can see them happening. And that for me was a trigger into kind of understanding where those feelings were in my body, but then also being able to then let them go and not keep feeding them, because then I'm just thinking about watching the feelings and watching as they go away, instead of being caught in this cycle of, oh, but what if I did this? Or like, oh, I'm so mad about this. What if I did this other thing? You know? So that was a really helpful technique for me.
That's awesome.
Nice.
We should definitely learn how to communicate what we're feeling. And a good way to do that is to use I statements. So, for example, when this happened, I felt like X because I thought it meant Y or whatever. Yeah. Instead of pinning the blame on your partner, saying, you made me feel this way. How could you do that? You are the bad guy.
Right.
Yeah,
Instead, using the I statement.
Yeah, that's
so
huge.
yeah, it could be something like, well, you didn't text me back right away, like you're so irresponsible and like you don't care about me.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It could be something like, well, when I didn't get a response from you for 3 hours, like I felt really lonely and I felt disappointed because I thought that it meant that like you weren't thinking about me, or that like you didn't care about our communication.
Right. Imagine being on the other side of that, right? If someone says like, oh, you didn't text me at all today, like you weren't thinking about me, you didn't care about me, and you're like, what the fuck? Like you're putting ideas into my head, like I don't know what to do with this. You could react angrily too. Whereas on the other side, it's like, this happened, I didn't hear from you today all day, like I felt really sad because like in my mind that meant that you didn't care. It gives the other person an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, no, that's not at all what it was. It was, I was busy and stressed about this other thing, and I didn't want to burden you with how stressed I was. Or, or I didn't even know that you were feeling that way, I'm so sorry, right? That it gives them the opportunity to be the good guy and help say, hey, you don't need to feel that thing. As opposed to saying, you did this, you felt this, right? Like telling someone else how they feel. Yeah.
And so, as I said at the beginning of this, what I do like about emotional responsibility is that then you can kind of use it as an opportunity to be like, okay, well, now that I know that this is what's going on inside of me, this is what I need. And that may not necessarily be something that you communicate to your partner. It may be something where you realize, like, oh, I have a trigger about this because, like, this happened in a previous relationship. So, okay, I think what I need is just to kind of, like, take some time to myself and, like, or maybe I need to take some time with counseling, or maybe I just need to go take some time and grab a beer with my best friend and complain about my last relationship, you know, to help process that. Or it could be something that you communicate to your partner. It could be something like, well, like, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe in the future, do you mind, like, if you are busy with something and can't respond right away, just letting me know that really quickly, and then we're cool, you know?
And something
or,
like
you know,
a monthly
like
scrum is a great way to do that, too. Because then it's
yes,
not right when
exactly.
you're
For
upset
sure.
about it. You have a specific time to talk about
Yeah.
that. Go back and listen to our episode about relationship scrum.
Yeah, it's really
Yes.
awesome. It's really, really awesome.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dedeker. Please continue.
No, you're good. I think we hit the main things. I mean, this is such a big topic and like such a big, heavy topic, and I feel like this. I feel like every single time there's any kind of conflict, big or small, in any of my relationships, like this is
It comes
completely
back to this.
relevant
Yeah.
because since none of us are dating Vulcans yet, these human emotions find their way into every single situation.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, for sure.
It's true. But like I said, if we didn't have them, we would all just be so bored with relationships, we wouldn't even give a fuck.
No, that's true.
So-
That's
True.
true. Very true.
It's true. And then we wouldn't have a podcast. We'd be podcasting about, like, I
Nothing.
don't know, fashionable eyebrow styles.
Ooh.
I don't know. Can you have
Vulcan,
fashion without
Vulcan
emotion?
thing.
There's your topic to discuss at home.
Ooh.
Get a group
Shit,
together.
That's
Ooh.
intense.
Is it possible to have art and fashion without emotion?
Without emotion. Oh,
There
that's
you
a
go.
good
You're
one.
welcome. You're welcome. Your next dinner party conversation
Maybe-
is solved.
Maybe the patron group can tackle that one.
Indeed.
Yeah, totally. Okay, thank you everybody so much. We love you all so much for listening. And if you want to support our show, check out our Patreon. And we'll see you next week on our next episode.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.